11-year-old Marty walked into a motorcycle club holding nothing but ashes, the burned remains of the only photo proving he ever had a family. He didn't ask for a place to stay. He asked for something far more painful. Can we take a new one? What happened next changed everything. Not just for him, but for a man who thought he'd lost his chance at being someone's family forever. The kid appeared just before 9, right when Wesley was counting the register. He was small for 11. Narrow shoulders, jeans that bunched at the ankles, backpack hanging off one strap like he'd been carrying it for miles. But it was his hands that made Wesley pause mid-count. The boy held something carefully between his palms, the way you'd cup water you were afraid of spilling. "We're about to close," Marcus called from the back, not unkindly. The boy didn't move, just stood there in the doorway of the Nighthawks clubhouse, fluorescent light cutting across half his face. His sneakers had holes near the toes. Wesley set down the cash drawer. "You lost, kid." "No, sir." The voice came out steady, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this. "I need to ask you something." There was a quality to his stillness that Wesley recognized, the kind that came from learning early that moving too fast got you noticed in the wrong ways. He'd seen it in his daughter's eyes during their last visit, the one where social workers watched from plastic chairs while Amanda pretended not to recognize his voice. "All right," Wesley said. "Ask." The boy stepped forward and opened his hands. It was a photograph, or what remained of one. The edges were black and curled, most of the image consumed by fire. Only one corner survived, a piece no bigger than a playing card showing part of a woman's smile and a child's hand gripping her sleeve. The emulsion had bubbled and cracked, but you could still make out the faded colors of a kitchen in the background. Yellow walls. A calendar with cartoon dogs. "My stepdad burned it," the boy said, matter of fact. "Last week. He said the past doesn't matter anymore, that I need to stop acting like it does." Wesley's throat went tight. He didn't reach for the photo. "It was the only one I had of me and my mom together. Before." The boy swallowed. Before he came around. Marcus had stopped wiping down tables. 2 other members, Tank and Luis, stood in the doorway to the garage, grease still on their hands. Nobody spoke. The kid looked directly at Wesley then, and there it was again, that terrible ancient stillness. "I was thinking maybe you could help me take a new one, a family picture, so I'd have proof I belonged somewhere." Wesley felt the weight of every word, each one settling somewhere he couldn't shake off. Wesley had spent 6 years building walls between himself and sentences like that. After the divorce, after Amanda went into the system, after the supervised visits turned into canceled visits turned into nothing at all, he'd learned to keep requests at arm's length. You couldn't disappoint people if you never promised them anything. But this kid wasn't asking for promises. He was asking for evidence, documentation, the kind of proof Wesley himself had tried to provide in family court, showing up to every hearing with calendars and receipts and character witnesses. None of it enough to convince a judge that a man who'd spent 2 decades in an MC could be trusted with his own daughter. "What's your name?" Wesley asked. "Marty." "Where's your mom now, Marty?" Something flickered across the boy's face. "I don't know. She left last winter. Ray, my stepdad, says she's sorting things out, that she'll come back when she's ready." The lie sat obvious in the space between them. Marty knew it was a lie. Wesley knew he knew. "And Ray sent you here?" "No, sir. He doesn't know I left." Marcus muttered something under his breath. Tank crossed his arms, jaw working. Wesley should have called someone. Child services, the police, someone whose job description included knowing what to do with 11-year-olds holding burned photographs. Instead, he said, "You eaten today?" Marty's hesitation was answer enough. "Marcus, get him something from the fridge." Wesley kept his eyes on the kid. "Sit down, Marty. We're going to figure this out." 20 minutes later, after Marty had eaten 2 sandwiches and half a bag of chips without saying a word, Wesley made a decision that surprised him. "All right," he said. "We'll take your picture." Marty looked up, mayonnaise still on his lip. "Really? Really? But not inside. Outside with the bikes." Wesley stood, ignoring the looks from Marcus and Tank. "You want a family picture, we do it properly. They assembled in the parking lot under the sodium lights. 6 of them in total, including Jax who'd just pulled in on his Harley. Nobody asked questions. When Wesley said line up, they lined up. Marty stood in the center, uncertain. His hands hung at his sides like he'd forgotten what they were for. Wesley positioned himself to the kid's left, not touching him, just close enough that the camera would catch them in the same frame. "Luis, you're taking it," Wesley said, handing over his phone. "I don't know about this, Wes," Luis muttered. But he raised the camera anyway. "Just take the damn picture." The flash went off. Once, twice, 3 times. When Wesley checked the screen, what he saw wasn't a family. It was a group of men who'd forgotten how to arrange their faces into anything resembling warmth, standing around a kid who looked like he was waiting for permission to breathe. But Marty stared at that image like it was oxygen itself. "Can I have it?" His voice had gone small again. Wesley sent it to the clubhouse printer, watched as Marty carefully slid the warm paper into a plastic sleeve pulled from his backpack, the kind kids used for baseball cards. The boy's hands shook slightly as he tucked it away, like he was afraid it might combust if he wasn't careful. "Thank you," Marty whispered. Wesley drove him back to Ray's house himself, got the address without asking too many questions. When Marty climbed out of the truck, Wesley said, "Same time next month. We'll take another one." Marty turned back, eyes wide. "You mean it?" "I mean it." He watched the kid walk up the cracked driveway to a house with bars on the windows and a dead lawn. Watched him pull out his key and let himself into darkness. Wesley sat there for a full minute after the door closed, engine idling, thinking about proof and photographs and all the ways a person could be erased. Then he put the truck in gear and drove home to his empty house, where the only photos on the walls were of motorcycles and men who'd never ask him for anything that mattered. By March, nobody pretended the photos were about anything except showing up. Marty showed up on the last Saturday of every month with the precision of someone who'd learned that consistency was a luxury. Wesley noticed the backpack getting heavier, the way the kid adjusted the straps more frequently. 7 photos became 8, then 9. The plastic sleeve had been replaced by a small binder with clear pages. The club stopped making excuses about why they showed up those Saturdays. Tank arrived with his hair combed. Luis wore shirts without oil stains. Marcus brought his good boots instead of the work ones with the blown-out sole. Nobody talked about it. They just lined up when Wesley gave the nod. Mrs. Chun had been teaching long enough to notice what others missed. The kid who stopped flinching, the one who suddenly remembered to eat lunch. Marty's transformation was quieter than most, but unmistakable. He stopped flinching during fire drills. It was a small thing, but when the alarm went off in November, Marty had dropped under his desk so fast that Mrs. Chun had to coax him out 10 minutes after everyone else had filed back inside. By February, he just stood up and walked to the door with the others, hands steady at his sides. His drawings changed too. In September, every self-portrait he'd drawn showed a figure alone, small, off to the edge of the page, surrounded by white space. By April, his art projects included buildings, motorcycles, faces that weren't his own. In one sketch, he'd drawn himself standing among a group of men, all of them the same height. When Mrs. Chun pointed out the proportions were off, Marty had simply said, "That's how it feels." She mentioned it to the school counselor during their monthly check-in. "I don't know what changed at home, but something did. He's still quiet, but it's different now. He doesn't watch the door anymore. Doesn't check where the exits are before sitting down." At the clubhouse, Wesley started keeping a folder. Nothing formal, just the photos, printed in order, each one dated on the back. April's picture showed Marty with his hands in his pockets instead of hanging limp. May's caught him mid-laugh at something Jax had said. June's was the first one where he looked directly at the camera without that rehearsed blankness. Ray noticed too, but his observations came with edges. "You're getting ideas," he told Marty one evening, voice flat in that way that made the kid's shoulders hunch. "Spending time with those bikers. Thinking you're part of something." Marty didn't respond. He'd learned that silence was safer than defense. "Boys who don't know their place end up disappointed," Ray continued, then walked away, leaving the threat hanging in the kitchen air. 2 weeks later, Marty showed up for the July photo wearing a t-shirt despite the heat. When he reached up to adjust his backpack, the fabric rode up, exposing a bruise across his shoulder blade, deep purple spreading into green at the edges. The kind that came from impact, not accident. Wesley saw it. So did Marcus. Neither of them said anything directly. Wesley had learned years ago that pushing too hard made kids shut down, and he couldn't afford for Marty to stop showing up. Instead, after the photo, Wesley handed him a disposable camera, the cheap kind from the drugstore with 27 exposures. "You can take pictures between our monthly ones," Wesley said, keeping his tone casual. "If you want." Marty stared at the camera like it might evaporate. "Of what?" "Whatever matters to you." The kid's hands trembled slightly as he accepted it, fingers wrapping carefully around the plastic body. "Thank you." "Don't mention it." But Marty did mention it. 3 days later, he came back to the clubhouse after school, the first time he'd shown up outside their schedule. He didn't say why he was there, just sat at one of the tables doing homework while Marcus worked on an engine and Wesley handled paperwork in the office. After an hour, Marty packed up his books. "I took some pictures," he said, producing the camera, "but I don't know how to get them developed." Wesley drove him to the pharmacy, waited while the clerk explained it would take an hour, then bought them both ice cream from the shop next door. They ate in the truck, neither of them filling the silence with unnecessary words. When the photos came back, Marty didn't show them to Wesley, just tucked the envelope into his backpack alongside the binder. But his shoulders sat differently afterward, less hunched, more certain of the space they occupied. That month's photo showed something the previous ones hadn't. Marty standing without trying. He simply existed in the frame without needing permission first. Like he'd stopped expecting things to disappear. The other club members looked different too. Tank's hand rested on Marty's shoulder, casual in a way that suggested he'd forgotten to be careful about it. 12 photos in the binder now. 12 months of proof. Wesley filed the latest one in his folder and tried not to think about what would happen if Ray decided Marty's place wasn't with people who showed up. But 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday afternoon, his phone rang. School secretary. Controlled panic in her voice. "There's a situation with Marty. His stepfather is here. We need you." Wesley was in the truck before she finished the sentence, Marcus riding shotgun without being asked. They made the 15-minute drive in 9. When they arrived, Ray stood in the principal's office, one hand wrapped around Marty's bicep, the kid's face blank in that old, practiced way. The same blankness from the first night he'd walked into the clubhouse holding ashes. Only now Wesley knew what it looked like when Marty didn't have to perform that emptiness. And he wasn't about to let the kid disappear back into it. Wesley walked into the principal's office like he belonged there. Ray's grip on Marty's arm tightened. The kid's face had gone completely smooth, that terrifying blankness that erased everything they'd built over 12 months. "And you are?" the principal asked, half standing behind her desk. "Emergency contact," Wesley said evenly. "Wesley Grant. I'm in the system." He'd added himself 3 months back, after Marty had shown up with fingerprint bruises on his forearm that he'd explained away as falling against the banister. The school counselor had been hesitant but desperate. Ray rarely answered calls, and there was no other family on file. Ray's eyes narrowed. "You have no authority here." "Neither do you, apparently." Wesley kept his voice level, turning to the counselor. "What's happening?" The counselor, a young woman named Sarah who looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past hour, glanced nervously between them. Mr. Patterson arrived during lunch requesting immediate removal of Marty from school. No advance notice, no documentation. When we asked for clarification, he became insistent. "I'm his legal guardian," Ray said. "I don't need permission to take my own kid." "Stepfather," Wesley corrected quietly. "And where's Marty's mother?" Ray's jaw locked. Something shifted behind his eyes. "That's none of your concern." "It became my concern when you made it mine." Wesley pulled out his phone. "Sarah, I'm calling Gina Reeves. She's a family attorney. And Marcus here." He gestured to Marcus, who'd positioned himself near the door. "Works with CPS. We're going to sort this out properly." You can't just, Ray started. I can, actually. Because right now, you're refusing to answer basic questions about a child's primary guardian, and you're attempting to remove him from school in the middle of the day without cause. Wesley's voice never rose. So we're going to wait for the proper authorities, and you're going to explain where Marty's mother has been. Ray's hand dropped from Marty's arm. She's traveling. For work. What kind of work? Marcus asked, pulling out a notepad. That's private. Not when a minor is involved, it isn't. Gina arrived in 20 minutes, professional in a way that made the room's temperature drop. She asked 3 questions that Ray couldn't answer. Where is the mother currently? When did you last speak with her? Do you have legal custody documentation? 3 questions, and Ray had no answers that held together. The mother wasn't traveling. She'd left without warning. No forwarding address. No contact since. Ray had kept Marty because reporting her disappearance seemed like more trouble than it was worth. He'd forged her signature on school forms. Never legally adopted the boy or filed for guardianship. He'd simply kept him. By the time CPS arrived 90 minutes later, Marty hadn't said a single word. He sat in the counselor's office, hands folded in his lap, while adults decided his future in the adjacent room. Wesley sat with him. Didn't try to fill the silence with reassurances he couldn't guarantee. Are they going to take me somewhere? Marty finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. Probably. For tonight, at least. Can I bring my backpack? Yeah, kid. You can bring your backpack. The emergency placement happened fast. Protocol when a guardian's legal status dissolved mid-crisis. A foster home across town. Temporary until they could sort out relatives or more permanent options. The caseworker was kind but efficient, the way people got when they'd processed too many cases to absorb each one individually. Marty was allowed to pack 1 bag from Ray's house, supervised. Wesley drove him there, watched as the kid moved through rooms like a ghost, collecting only essentials. Clothes, toothbrush, the binder. He reached for it first. At the foster home. A tidy ranch with a swing set in the yard and motivational posters on the walls. Marty thanked the caseworker politely, shook hands with the foster parents, and disappeared into the bedroom they'd assigned him. Wesley left his number. He can call anytime. That night, Marty spread the photos across an unfamiliar bedspread and counted them. They'd taken 2 extras during good months. He arranged them in chronological order, studying each one like he was memorizing evidence. The foster mother knocked softly. You okay, honey? Yes, ma'am. She didn't push. But an hour later, she called the caseworker. He's not upset. That's what worries me. He's too calm. The caseworker made a note in the file, then called Wesley. He keeps looking at photographs. Do you know anything about that? Yeah, Wesley said. I know about that. The court date is set for next week. They're going to ask Marty where he feels safest. She paused. Off the record, you should be there. Wesley sat in his kitchen after the call ended, staring at the folder he'd been keeping the photos. More than a year of documented care. Of consistency Wesley couldn't fake even if he wanted to. He'd lost Amanda to a system that decided consistency wasn't enough, that his past outweighed his present. He'd spent 6 years believing he didn't get second chances. But Marty wasn't asking for a second chance. He was asking for the first one to count. Wesley opened his laptop and started typing an email to Gina. Subject line, custody evaluation. What do I need? In a house across town, Marty pulled out the February photo, the one where Wesley's hand rested on his shoulder for the first time. He held it carefully, like the burned photograph he'd carried into the clubhouse a year ago. Only this one wasn't ashes. This one was proof that someone stayed. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and recycled air. Wesley sat 3 rows back, hands folded, watching Marty at the front table beside his court-appointed attorney. The kid wore clothes the foster family had bought him, khakis and a button-up that was slightly too big. He looked smaller than he had in jeans and a t-shirt at the clubhouse. Ray sat on the opposite side with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The stepdad kept his eyes forward, jaw tight. Gina had coached Wesley the night before. You're not a party to this case. You're a witness to Marty's stability and routine. Don't oversell. Let the evidence speak. The evidence sat in a manila folder on the attorney's table. Every photo they'd taken, dates written in Wesley's handwriting on each back, proof that couldn't be argued with. The judge was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and tired eyes of someone who'd heard every excuse, believed none of them, and made decisions anyway. She reviewed the case file without expression, occasionally making notes. Ray's defense crumbled quickly under questioning. No, he couldn't provide proof of the mother's whereabouts. No, he hadn't filed a missing person report. No, he didn't have legal custody documentation. When asked why he'd kept Marty without proper authority, he said, "It seemed easier than getting the system involved." The judge's pen stopped moving. Easier for whom? Ray didn't answer. Marty's attorney presented the photographs methodically, explaining the monthly ritual, the documented consistency, the transformation visible in the progression. She called Mrs. Chen, who testified about the changes in Marty's behavior, the decreased anxiety, the improved engagement, the drawings that went from solitary figures to connected groups. Then she called Wesley. He walked to the stand feeling like every bad decision he'd ever made was tattooed on his forehead. The motorcycle club, the divorce, the custody battle he'd lost with Amanda. But the attorney didn't ask about any of that. She asked about the photos. "Can you explain how this monthly ritual began?" Wesley kept his eyes on Marty. "He asked for help taking a family picture. So we took one. And you continued for over a year. Why?" "Because he kept showing up. And I figured if someone's going to show up consistently for you, the least you can do is show up for them." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Grant, are you seeking custody of Marty?" Wesley's throat went dry. "If the court thinks that's appropriate, yes, ma'am. I've started the evaluation process. Do you understand the responsibility involved?" "Yes, ma'am. I lost custody of my own daughter years ago. I understand exactly what's at stake." The honesty seemed to catch the judge off guard. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You may step down." The final testimony came from Marty himself. The judge's voice softened when she addressed him. "Marty, I need to ask you some questions. You can take your time answering." "Yes, ma'am." "Where do you feel safest?" Marty reached for the binder in front of him, the one he'd brought from the foster home, the one he'd been holding throughout the entire hearing. He opened it carefully, flipping through the plastic sleeves until he found the most recent photo. It had been taken 3 weeks ago, unscheduled. Marty had called the clubhouse in tears. Ray had destroyed the disposable camera and the photos it contained, said the kid was wasting time on stupid things. Wesley had simply driven over, picked him up, taken him back to the clubhouse. In the photo, Marty sat on Wesley's motorcycle, helmet too big on his head, grinning like the world had just expanded to include possibilities he hadn't known existed. Wesley stood beside the bike, one hand resting on the handlebar. He looked like he'd forgotten the camera was there. Natural in a way staged photos never capture. Marty held it up for the judge to see. "I already have a family," he said quietly. "We just had to take a picture so I could prove it." The courtroom went completely silent. The judge removed her glasses, studied the photograph, then looked at the progression of images in the file before her. Nearly 2 years of documented care, monthly photos plus several taken outside the ritual. 23 pieces of evidence that someone had showed up consistently without legal obligation or blood relation. "I'm granting temporary custody to Mr. Grant pending full evaluation," she said. "Permanency hearing in 6 months." Wesley's hands started shaking. Marty turned in his chair, eyes wide and uncertain, like he was afraid to believe what he'd just heard. Outside the courthouse, Marty didn't cry. He just stood on the steps, backpack on both shoulders, looking at Wesley like he was trying to solve an equation. "You meant it," Marty said. "About showing up." "Yeah, kid. I meant it." 1 month later, they took another photo. But this time, Marty held the camera. He'd grown 2 inches, filled out slightly from consistent meals and the absence of fear. He stood straighter, moved through space like he had permission to occupy it. He framed the shot carefully, The club members arranged casually around the garage, Wesley in the center this time, hands in his pockets. Marty clicked the shutter and studied the preview screen for a long moment. Then he looked up. Can we take one more? I want to be in this one too. They reset. Someone else held the camera. Marty stood next to Wesley, not touching but close. The way family does when they've moved past performing connection and into simply existing together. When the photo printed, Marty didn't put it in the binder. He pinned it to the wall of his new room, the room in Wesley's house that still smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The room with the window facing the street, where he could see who was coming and didn't have to brace himself when he heard footsteps. The binder sat on his desk, full but not finished. Because some families aren't born in a moment. They happen in small increments, one photo, then another, even when you're not sure what you're building yet. Until the weight of them becomes impossible to ignore, proving month after month that belonging isn't something you lose when someone burns the evidence. It's something you create, frame by frame, until no one can take it away. Sometimes family isn't about blood or legal papers. It's about who stays when staying is the hardest thing to do. What would you have done in Wesley's position? Would you have taken that first photo? Share your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that remind us what really matters. We'll see you in the next one.